Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala khatam al-anbiya'i wa mursaleen. Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa ba'd. Is that sound okay? Is that right? My beloved brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessing of being a Muslim in these very critical times in the world. And we have to reflect upon the fact that our presence here is not by chance. It is by the will of Allah. And the last Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not speak from himself. He spoke from above 7 heavens. And we need to begin to look at his words as a type of road map, a type of divine information that came to us that we can reflect upon in these very difficult times. And one tradition, the Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said, Inna Allah zawali al-ard, fara'aytu mashariqaha wa magharibaha, wa inna mulka ummati sayablughu ma zuwiya li minha. The Prophet ﷺ said, verily Allah showed me the expanses of the earth. He showed me the east and the west. And he informed me that the possessions of my ummah would reach as far as the horizons. And Sadaqa Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, Muslims reached far into the east. Within 100 years, Muslims, without having a large army, crossed cultural barriers, geographical barriers, environment, and reached all the way to China. And it is reported that the maternal uncle of the Prophet, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, radiallahu anhu, was buried in China. And so that distance, that far distance to the east, Muslims reached. To the west, in the time of the Tabi'een, Uqba ibn Nafi', rahimahullah, radiallahu anhu, reached all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And he looked across the ocean and said that if I knew there was land across this ocean, I would take this message. Because that is the job of the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ said that the people who are present should take this message to all those in humanity who are absent. And our presence in the far west, Al-Maghrib Al-Aqsa, is a phenomena which is growing and expanding and has a lot of great challenges, especially with the situation today, the economic situation in the West, the geopolitical situation in the world. There are great, tremendous changes that we are going through. And I want to just look back with you at Canada itself to try to understand something about the Muslims in these lands. What we have to recognize and realize when we are dealing with Canada itself, that the word Canada is really an Iroquois word, which means it's Kanata, which means a big village. So you are literally living in a big native village. That's what this country actually means. And the Aboriginal people, the First Nations, it is reported, migrated to this part of the world, some say possibly 20,000 years ago. They crossed the Bering Straits from Russia. At that time, because it was frozen in the north, you could actually cross the frozen north and go from Russia into Alaska, into the northern Yukon region of Canada, and populate. Some of the people who came from Mongolia and that region there, some took boats and went down into the south. They didn't necessarily go directly into the land. They went along the coastline and then went south. It's also found that people have crossed from Polynesia, from the islands in the South Pacific, also crossed over. So that is another place where human beings, crossed from ancient times. And amongst the First Nations people, there were those who believed in one God. And that is the way it was in all parts of the world. And I studied this, I traveled to different parts of the world. The Chinese, in Mandarin Chinese, their word for God is Shang-Ti. Shang-Ti. And Shang-Ti for them was the great spirit, the creator, who was like, a king in a court. They were lower gods. That's something like the Mushrikeen of Mecca, right? But they did believe in a creator, right, who initiated and began life. Similarly, when I was in Africa, in Southern Africa, I found every African nation in their own tongue has a way of expressing the Creator. It's unique, every single African nation. And so this concept there, which in Surah An-Nahl we learn that Allah Azza wa Jal has told us, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنْ يَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. And verily we sent to every nation a messenger, that they would worship Allah and stay away from false gods. So this is the first Islam. In one tradition, it is reported that the Prophet ﷺ has said over 124,000 prophets and messengers came to every nation and every tribe. So when we speak about Islam in the beginning, Islam in Canada, right, in Canada, in the village, it was here before the presence of Muslims coming from the Middle East or Asia. On the other side, it was already in the village. Okay, similarly, some of the people worship many gods, and some tribes had what they call totem pole. And you will see some worshiping, power forces from the sun and from the natural world. And that is the way it was in all parts of the world. In 1534, the first contact made with the major wave of Europeans, you could say the first Europeans to come here really was the Vikings. And that was Leif Erikson. The Vikings came back, many years before the 15th, 16th century. But Jacques Cartier, who came in around 1534, he made contact with the Micmac. And when you read the writings of the Micmac, and there was a writing I read into, it was something which came from the Micmac Grand Council of 1986. And they had recorded oral documents, oral traditions. And in that they spoke about Niskam. And I was surprised to see their concept of Niskam, who they considered to be the creator. His names and descriptions, many of them are similar to what we call Asma al-Husna, right? The beautiful names of Allah. Very similar concept. And so you can see the presence of Tawheed amongst the people. Two books that you could read to get some of this information. One is Lies My Teacher Told Me. It's by a man named James Lowen, right? And the second is A People's History of the U.S. by Howard Zinn. Now, these are the types of books that we need to read to, next to what we get in our regular curriculums. Because what these authors have tried to do is to give you a new history of this part of the world, deconstruct the information and put it together in a new fashion so that people can actually see in a more objective way what actually happened in this part of the world. So this really is what you could call early Islam in Canada, right? This is early Islam. And not only the Micmac nation, but there would have been other nations, also the Cherokee nation as well. That's more down in the United States. The Cherokee has definite proof left in their oral traditions. Robert Crane, C-R-A-N-E, who used to be an advisor to the President of the United States, Richard Nixon. Robert Crane was a part Cherokee, and he was able to go into the Cherokee elders' meetings, and he got a lot of the old traditions. And he found that the Cherokees who was one of the most successful groups of natives in North America. They call them even the Jews of the Indians because of their business skills and whatnot. They used to face east when they prayed. And Crane brings in one tradition, they even say, Ya Allah, right at the beginning of their prayers. And so Cherokee Nation, they have definite proof of the belief in one God. But you will find it in many nations. In this case, we have a direct, for Canada itself, we have a direct proof that comes from the Mi'kmaq nation. Following this, the first recorded Muslims are coming in 1871. Okay, it's in 1871, John and Martha Simon. They were recorded in Ontario, and they came to Ontario and they were called Mahometans. Now you see this name Mahomet. That is the name used in the Middle Ages by the Crusaders. Against the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they used the word Mahomet. Right? They use it in a bad way. But whenever you see that name mentioned, that is their way of saying Muslims. Okay, so these are the first two recorded on the census documentation. And at that time, they also recorded about 17 Muslims in Ontario. Okay, so that goes back to 1871. And also in 1854, this is that early period, James Love, he is recorded also. He was born in Ontario as well, right? And by 1971, there were about 33,000 early settlers who came in to Canada. Now, we know that the early settlers here, as well as in the United States, and many of the European colony states, settler states, they had a type of apartheid system. So they ranked people by color, and they used people for different reasons based on color. So they needed people to help them open up the West. And their own people were very sick at the time. There was a lot of plagues and diseases and whatever. So they looked toward the Muslim world. Could they encourage and entice some people from the Muslim world to come into Canada and the United States and work as settlers in early America? And so, but the problem was for them, they would only want light-skinned people, what we classify today as European or white people. But Europe itself is not a continent. Europe is not a continent. It's connected to Asia. And so people of light complexion, from, you can say from Germany or the Caucasoid Mountains in Russia, have actually migrated into Asia and been going back and forth for centuries. In India, you have the Brahmin class. And they said the Brahmins were like Aryan people who migrated from the north and settled in India, and they set up a caste system. And the concept of caste, varna, is actually also race. So the darker you are, you see the lower you are in the system of the caste system. Okay, that's a type of apartheid system. We use the word apartheid because that's what the South Africans call their system. That's the most recent form of discrimination based on race. In any event, here, what happens is light-skinned people from the Muslim world. So they took it from the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire included not only Syrians, Lebanese, Turks, but also Albanians, Yugoslavians, really Bosnia, right? Bosnia and people from the Ottoman territories. So they were the ones to come in. And you will see early settlers in the United States and in Canada coming from this. 1971, they record 33,000 people are officially recorded. Now these statistics, usually our population is usually double the statistics. But anyhow, this is the recorded statistics. 33,000 by 1971. And these settlers came into Ontario, Alberta, other parts. They worked on the railroad. They were farmers. They had businesses and whatnot. And that's the reason why in Canada, the oldest masjid is Masjid Rashid Mosque, which is in Edmonton, Alberta. That's the oldest masjid in Canada right now. In the United States, in Cedar Rapids, also there in Iowa, it's also the oldest masjid there. And the same Syrian, Lebanese people who came on the wagon trains, that's the reason why the oldest masjids are in the Midwest. You would think that the oldest masjid would be on the East Coast. But the waves that were coming in, they sent them with the settlers. Because it was dangerous out there. It's a new territory, you've got to be really strong. And you also have to face the natives too, right? You have to face them, because many of the native tribes did not submit peacefully. So they were part of the settlers that went out into that area. And by 1938, there's your masjid, Al-Rashid Mosque, opened in Edmonton. And I found a very interesting thing when I went to the Rashid Mosque last year. The ceremony that they had for the mosque, the MC of the ceremony was Abdullah Yusuf Ali. Remember that Quran translator? Yusuf, we say Yusuf Ali Quran. He came from London, UK. They invited him because he had made that early translation, right? So he was the MC for the program when they opened up a Rashid Mosque. By 1981, okay, this is another 40 plus years, Muslims are now coming in. It's recorded about 98,000. About 98,000 officially are here in Canada. And by that time, there were skilled workers, professionals, teachers, and students that was coming in. Waves of people were now coming in. Okay? By 1991, okay, it jumped. It started jumping significantly now. Okay, those are the older generation that were here in the early days. You remember a few little masjids and MSA, little centers that we had there. That would have been, the 1981 70s, 80s. Then a big wave came in the 80s. By 91, 235,000 Muslims are reported in Canada on the official records. And the difference was now, they were not just people who were professionals or, coming for agriculture or specific jobs. Now they were coming from crisis zones. So there were people coming in from droughts, famines, war-torn situations, who were coming into Canada. Canada had one of the biggest, largest immigration policies in the world. They were allowing people to come in. And so a lot of people start coming in. This number increases with the crises now increasing in the Muslim world. Right now, and it's been probably for the last 10 years or so, we have the largest refugee population in the world. Okay, so they blame us for terrorism, right? But we're terrorized more than anybody else. We have the largest refugee populations. And so by 2001, there's recorded 579,740. That's about 2% of the population. Okay. By 2006, our numbers are increasing now. We're having a lot of babies too. Go to the Canadian hospitals, look at the babies, and you see a lot of Muslims. I don't know what the percentage is, it's pretty high. In some parts of Canada, like Toronto, it was even reaching at 1.50% of children born in the hospitals. It was reaching that level. But by 2006, we reached about 783,700, 2.5. By 2011 now, 940,000, right? In Toronto itself, it's recorded about 250,000. That's about 10% of the GTA. We actually believe we're double this number. We don't believe we're 250. We believe we're about 500. Okay, but this is your recorded information, that we're actually 10% of the population of the greater Toronto area itself. And the projection is If we continue to have babies like we do, and also people accepting Islam, people coming in to the country, by 2030, we could be somewhere around 2.7 million if we continue to grow, which means we're going to be a significant part of this population. Now, for the early information here, you can get it from the book called Muslims and Islam in Canada, right? Written by Dawood Hassan Hamdani, right? That's your proof of your statistics. If anybody wants to follow it up, you can get your statistics from Muslims and Islam in Canada, okay? Now, in the present situation that we're in, with approximately 1 million Muslims or so in Canada, and our population increasing, right? We're thinking that it's going to be possibly almost 3 times the size by 2030. We're having a growth rate problem. One statistic is even saying Canadian Muslims have a higher birth rate than regular society. We have 2.1 and the society has 1.6. Okay, so we're rising. About 60% of the Muslims in the whole country reside in Ontario. And we're having a growth problem, okay? And I can recall having accepted Islam in 1970 and being part of that early community there. And then I went overseas, I came back. We still only had 3 major masjids in the city, right, by the early 80s. Some small musallas were around, but in terms of major masjids, we only had a couple. Now we expanded in the past 15 years or so, unbelievably. There's maybe 120 masjids in Toronto area, and it's expanding. And so this has given us some serious challenges, especially with the younger generation. Because the older generation, to a great extent, the personality is there. People speak their language, people have come from somewhere, you know who you are. But the younger generation is caught up in changing society, with Canada being a mixed society. So you have a Spanish-speaking person, a Greek-speaking person, an Arabic-speaking person, Urdu-speaking person, and the young people who speak those languages, when they speak English, is the same. It's Canadian English. Body language, a lot of it is the same. Habits, cultural traits, a lot of it is the same. Some people call it the McDonaldization of the world, right? Where McDonald's is now the international food. So people are wearing the same shoes and jeans, the same type of clothing, like the same sports heroes, a lot of their feelings, very similar. And it's crossing cultural barriers. And that in itself is a good thing in some ways. The problem is that sometimes when you get into this global culture, right, it makes your own natural family culture seem a little strange. So that's causing a problem, with the younger generation. It's what I would call an identity crisis. And I was talking with one Muslim sister, and she said when she was going to the school, and there weren't many Muslims in the school at the time, and she felt isolated, and they looked at her. She looked like, this was in the United States, which is more pressure than Canada, but it's very similar. But she looked like a Spanish person. So she used to tell people she's Spanish. She's like Puerto Rican or, from Nicaragua or something, instead of telling them that she's from Pakistan. Because then they can identify, oh, you're Puerto Rican, you're Spanish. So now you got people in back of you, right? You can survive, right? Nobody's going to make fun of your culture. There's a lot of Spanish-speaking people. She's living in Florida, right? There's a lot of Spanish-speaking people in Florida, right? But what are you going to say if you tell, the people in Florida that you're from Lebanon, right? Or you're from Algeria. Some of them don't even know where it is on the map. So you get a cultural identity. It's almost like a type of schizophrenia, where you've got sort of like two personalities. You got one personality for the mosque and the community, another personality for school and for friends. Okay, so Bilal, while Bilal is, in the mosque and with everybody, Bilal's a nice, friendly guy. But when he goes to school, he's Billy. Right? Bilal changed. Right? Ali is Al. Asia is Asia. They start changing. And so that's like a identity problem. So that's one of the issues that we have to face. Racism. Racism, discrimination. Out of this identity thing comes discrimination, because racism, there's one part of racism where it's just your race. Okay, somebody might call you names, but there's another part of racism, which is what they call institutionalized racism. And that is where, because of your race or your color, you're not going to get a job, or you're not going to be able to move into a house, right? Just because of the way you look. That's the worst part of racism. That's institutionalized. Okay, so that's a problem that Muslim community faces, and this has now blossomed into Islamophobia. And Islamophobia, as we know, is the fear of Islam. If you look like a Muslim, you got a name like a Muslim, it's a fear. Some people, when they were faced with this problem of discrimination and hatred, racism, they said, we're going to assimilate. And what does that mean? That means you try to become exactly like your master, or like the major race that's above you. And that's where the identity changes, like we said. Muhammad is Mo. Right? So when he gives it, he goes to work and he said, just call me Mo. Now, sometimes, maybe that is a good way, because maybe they can't pronounce your name right. But they can pronounce a lot of names. The Greek names are hard to pronounce too, right? Other names, are hard to pronounce. But the Muslim will say, just call me Mo, and assimilate. But assimilation is not going to work. Because now, because of Islamophobia, they'll attack you even if you got a suit on. Once they know who you are, you can't hide. And there was a story of a brother in the UK. He went to get a job with a British corporation. And the British, of course, are very crafty. They studied us very well. They colonized us. They know us better than the Canadians do. And so the British man said, okay, you want to get this job in my corporation? And, our brother, Muhammad, he put on his gray pants, his blue vest, jacket, his red tie, parted his hair. He was ready. He's coming to the corporation, right? The British man said, what's your name? He said, Mo. He looked at the thing and he saw his name was Muhammad, right? So he knows he's a Muslim. The British man then said to him, do you pray? Are you going to ask for time off during the day to pray? And Mo said, no, not me. Not me. I'm not going to pray. It's okay. I'll just work. I won't take. I said, okay. British man then said, do you want time off on Friday for Jummah? And Mo said, no, not me. I will be loyal to your company and I'll stay and work. So the British man said, come back tomorrow. The next day when Mo came back, the British man said, I'm not going to give you your job. Because if you're disloyal to your religion, you're going to be disloyal to me. You understand this? He knew that he had to pray. Because he knows us well, right? He knew that we needed to take time for Jummah. And if this guy is going to turn against his own religion, right? then he's a treacherous. He's not dependable person, right? Because he can't even be honest with his own faith. How is he going to be honest and loyal to the company? You see how the British man thought? So really, Mo becomes what they call, he lost in the dunya and the next life. Both. So it's better to just represent yourself properly. State what you believe, right? Don't be ashamed of yourself. Come out of yourself. Okay? But some people, when, they didn't assimilate, they isolate. That's another reaction to Islamophobia. Isolate. They go in the masjid and they close the door and they say, only our group is safe, all the rest of the world is going to hellfire. We're the only true Muslims. Well, like we were talking today, the person said, I'm not going to speak English. I'm so proud of myself because I never spoke a word of English in my life. And I refuse to speak English. Right? Usually what that is an inferiority complex. He's afraid to speak English. He's afraid to come out to the public. It's not because he's really protecting himself, but he thinks if he isolates himself, he's safe. But the old fable of an ostrich that buries its head in the sand, right? The ostrich puts its head in the sand, but the rest of it is sticking up, right? So he thinks he's hiding in the sand because his head's under the ground, but his body's showing. So similarly, isolation's not going to work, man, especially with digital technology, right? Because they can watch you inside the masjid anyway and hear everything as long as you got an electronic, piece with a chip inside of it. They're going to follow you anyway. And, there's nothing for us to be afraid of anyway. We're transparent people. So why are we afraid? So isolation is not going to work. And this is the crisis now. And with the Muslim world, and we spoke about, this crisis somewhat in the last few days. That we have great wealth and poverty. We have large armies, but we still feel humiliated and defeated. We have intellectuals, and many times our scholars argue over minor points, trivia, right? And this creates a type of frustration. And so we want to be proactive and to look at some solutions to the problem and be proactive. Because assimilation, not going to work. Isolation, not going to work. Another tactic, desperate confrontation. That's not going to work. Okay, what we need is Islamic revival. We need to revive Islam in a living way, a dynamic form of Islam that we can use right now. Right? For our communities to become relevant, and we can use Islam right now in this world. So I want to make some recommendations. There's 10 recommendations we want to make to you. One is an increase in taqwa. The bottom line in a lot of the problems that Muslims face is their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once that becomes weak, everything else becomes weak. Your salat becomes weak, your unity becomes weak, your connection with the Quran becomes weak. Once your relationship with Allah Azza wa Jalla, the more consciousness of God that we have, right, is the better we're able to implement and practice our Islam, in this world. And so that is a very important point. And you can increase your taqwa, by reading the Quran in a different way. That we read it with tajweed, and then we think about it, right? Think about the verses, right, that you read, get a tafsir, have it explained, and then practice it. Follow its commands, right? It's 3 parts. So you read it nicely, you think about what's in it, and then you practice. That's different than some people who just read it. Some people just read it and don't even know what they're reading. Okay, our relationship has got to change. It's better that we read a small amount of the Quran and we understand it, than we read a lot of it and we have no understanding. Okay? 2, a proper knowledge of Islam. And that means that everybody needs to begin to learn classical Arabic language. The closer you get to Fusha classical Arabic is the closer you're getting to the wahi, the revelation. So everybody needs to spend time getting familiar with Arabic, right? Get yourself some Arabic books, right? Get into a class, be around Arabic speaking people, ask them to address you sometimes in Arabic, right? Learn how to function. That's how a child functions, right? Children learn languages faster than their adults, their parents. You'll see somebody move into an area, the people are speaking the language, and the parents are reading the grammar and whatever, and the child outside playing. So the child, just after a while, the child's walking in and is talking. He's talking, and the parents are stuck on the grammar because it's total immersion. It's total immersion, right? It's like in Arabic when you say, he is big. In English we say, he is big, she is big, they are big. We change it. In Arabic they say, huwa kabir, which in English would be he big. It sounds like you're talking Jamaican patois, right? Him big, right? That's this patois, like it's colloquial. He big, she big, they big, right? It sounds like a colloquial, but that's what the Arabs don't use is in the middle, right? So the little kid, he's in the streets, he just starts talking, he big, she big. The parents are learning Jumla, Ismiya, Mubtada, and Khaba, and whatever, and they say, they're forgetting what this Jumla, Ismiya, Fi'liya, and this and that, like all these rules. The kid just said, he big. Huwa kabir. And so that grammar rule, the child has internalized the grammar rule. They might not be able to explain it to you, but they say it. So if you're around people speaking Arabic, or you get into a total immersion course, right, then you can start picking it up and then go to the Arab world, spend a month or 2 months, be around people speaking Arabic, right? By memorizing Quran and studying tafsir, you're also going to learn vocabularies, right? And then you can get closer and closer. Also with the usul, or the basic parts of our religion, understanding the Quran properly, the hadith, fiqh, study these subjects, then our Islam is based on, solid foundations, not culture. Because culture is different. When I accepted Islam, I thought all halal meat had chili in it. I thought halal meant hot food. Because every time I ate halal, it had pepper. Then I met some Bosnians and other people, and they had no pepper in it. And I realized that halal is how you sacrificing the animal, the absence of pork and alcohol, that's halal. The chili or no chili, that's your culture. But when people think the chili is the deen, you understand this point? When they think the chili is the deen, and not the sacrifice of the animal, now you got a problem. Because some Muslims don't like chili. It's almost like you got two religions, right? And that's why sometimes Muslims appear to be very different, because they're following their culture. They're not following the principles of the religion. So that's why we need a proper knowledge of Islam. These are some points for challenges. These are to revive Islam, leadership. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get out of this present problem? 3, proper Islamic character. More emphasis needs to be placed on Islamic character. Many people put emphasis on the clothes, on what you say. Some people say change your name. Change your name in some places like half the religion. No, character is the key part. Prophet ﷺ said in many traditions, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Verily, I was sent to complete the best in character. That's why I was sent. Character. So it's not just pray. Why do you pray? What's the benefits of prayer? You see? That's the key thing now, character. Not scandalizing people, not talking against people, having a good mannerism about you. That is how Islam spread. So we need to emphasize this with our children in the same way we emphasize learning how to make wudu and learning how to pray, whatnot. We need to emphasize akhlaq, character. Number 4, courage and patience. It will take a lot of shuja'ah, courage, and sabr, patience is necessary. And as I was saying, it's patience with good times as well, as-sabr al-afiyah, which means in good times we give back the blessings that we got for obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 5, wisdom and balance. Balance. Wisdom, putting things in the proper place. Wisdom is a key point now in the revival of Islam. Because not how much Quran that you memorize or how many hadiths that you studied. It's how you apply it. That's what the key thing is. And we see some of our brothers and sisters in the Muslim world, they quickly took in all this Islam, and when they apply it, it becomes extreme. It's too much on the people. So the wisdom of application of Islam. Because when Islam was first revealed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for 13 years did not institute major compulsory acts on Muslims. When they were in Mecca, they used to only pray 2 times a day. There's no 5 salats. Okay? There's no fasting in Ramadan. There's no paying zakat. There was no hajj. Right? For those 13 years. And it's only near the end when the Isra and Mi'raj that the 5 salats come in. But it's not until they reach Medina and then it's instituted. And the 5 salats come in, the rules of fasting, the rules of zakat, the rules of hajj. But the first 13 years was character building. So when they got the knowledge, when they got this information now, the laws of Islam, they could apply the laws properly. You see? So wisdom and balance is a very important quality today in applying our deen. Number 6 is the knowledge of the environment. And when I say the environment, I don't just mean global warming. I mean the environment, like what are the trends in society, right? Some Muslims, the problem with Muslims is sometimes you have some people who know Islam very well, but they don't know what's happening in society. You have other people who know the society very well, but they don't understand Islam. And many of them represent us on television and whatnot, and they say really weird things. They don't even know what they're talking about. So we need people who have a strong foundation in the deen, and at the same time, they know what's happening in the world. So they can interpret Islam to the world, right? To practice it today. Right? It's a very key point. And this means, knowledge of the environment also means, like what we studied a little bit earlier, who were the first Muslims in Canada? What did these Muslims go through? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Many problems that you're facing now in your masjid, or you're going through, we've already went through this in Toronto. So why reinvent the wheel, right? You can take a step and go, check the communities who went through these phases, so you don't have to fall into the same problem. This is why I say it's really important for the community to develop a type of trust fund, right? And people get a lawyer, right? Create a trust fund, in the masjid's name, and people put their waqf, they put their money toward the trust. Put your money toward the trust. And that trust fund can pay for for somebody to come to be a regular teacher in your community. The imam does not have to be, the person who leads salat is not necessarily the imam, right? Or the amir. The one who gives you the khutbah and does your counseling and, is a dynamic person, is sort of like a CEO, right? It's like a CEO of the Islamic Center. That's what you need. You need a dynamic CEO of the Islamic Center. For leading Salat, you can get a Hafiz. You have a Hafiz maybe in your community. And the CEO himself obviously will have Islamic knowledge, so he'll lead sometimes. But you need a CEO of the masjid. So the word is not Imam. You see, we have this problem in our mind when we think of Imam, right? Everybody thinks it's like Imam Khomeini or, something. Imam is like some, holy religious figure with all these qualities. No, you need a CEO of the masjid, of the Islamic Center. And that CEO's job is to, study the community, study the problems, and develop dynamic programs for the youth, programs for the women, counseling, dawah and outreach, right? Organize things, get the treasury book in order, just like the CEO of a corporation, right? But you need to pay the CEO. You can't expect somebody to come volunteer their time to do this, because people have to pay rent. They have to eat food, right? So, but if the community develops a type of trust fund, and money is given to the trust fund, and from the trust fund you pay the CEO. See, that's one model. I'm giving you a possible model to do this. And you will come out of the problem that many Islamic centers faced in other places. Because without a proper CEO for your community, right, you can only go so far. You're only going to go so far, right? If you get a CEO, a proper director, you call the CEO a director of the mosque, right? With a proper director, then your whole program will change. Your organization will change. People's relationship with the masjid will change. Because now the people realize they're part of an association. Right? They're an active member of an association. Right? And there's checks and balances. Right? And the CEO, there needs to be some setup in your constitutions and whatever, that if the CEO doesn't do his job, right, or he's out of control, you can get another one. See, so these things you need to try to work out with people who may have gone through this kind of thing before. But it's a crisis not only here, it's in Toronto as well, and many other masjids have this type of thing. Right? So, knowledge of the environment, what happened in the past to Muslims here and in Canada. Next is shura. Shura. And that is consultation. That in everything we do, we consult each other. There's got to be consultation in our families, consultation in our Islamic centers, right? Between the leadership, everybody's, have town meetings, town hall meetings, discuss affairs, right? Come to a consensus on things, get people involved, right? Islam is a jama'ah, it's a group. Prophet ﷺ said, Yadullah ma'al jama'ah, the hand of Allah is with the jama'at, the united organization, right? So that shura is a very important concept. And, cooperation and operational unity. That, I don't believe, is such a problem here in Thunder Bay. Because you don't have like Toronto, we have so many masjids, so many communities, right? So we need to cooperate with each other and operational unity. That means that at least we work together. The masjid may be slightly different, maybe it's a different school of thought or a different linguistic group, but each masjid needs to sit in shura with the rest, right? Operational unity, right? That's the terminology that I'm using for. Next is a positive, empowering approach. Empowerment. Empowering people. Positive. Right? Not negative, dynamic. Right? That's the approach, that we need now in these times. And it's not easy because there's a lot against us. But positive is, if we read more of the hadiths of the last days, right? Eventually victory will come to the Muslims. It's coming. It's going to be a storming period before it comes. But it is destined to eventually come. And we need to keep this in mind and focus on how we empower the youth, we empower women, empower people in our communities. This is crucial. Okay? And number 10, outreach. Dawah, right? Reaching out to society. We have to have active outreach programs that is providing Islamic solutions to real problems of society. Right? Provide Islamic solutions. Help people, in the society itself. See? So these are some points in terms of, practical solutions to the problems, or some direction that we need to take to implement, and to be able to, deal with the problems that we are facing. Okay? And so we end in peace. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.